I knew something was catastrophically wrong the moment I reached for my rescue inhaler and took that first desperate puff. The familiar metallic taste was gone, replaced by something that felt like breathing in nothing but air. My chest tightened like a vice as my asthma attack intensified, but the medication that had saved my life countless times before wasn't working. In that terrifying moment, gasping for breath in my childhood bedroom, I had no idea that my own sister had been systematically sabotaging my inhalers for months, turning my life-saving medication into useless decoys. What started as sibling rivalry had escalated into something far more sinister, and by the time the truth came out, I would discover that Ashley's jealousy had nearly cost me everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Jessica Mitchell, and at 24 I thought I had my severe asthma under control. Living with this condition since childhood meant I was obsessively careful about my medication routine. Two inhalers were my constant companions, the daily maintenance inhaler that kept my airways open, and the rescue inhaler that could literally mean the difference between life and death during an attack. That March morning in our family home in Lakewood, Colorado, should have been just another routine day, but the mountain air was thick with pollen, and I could feel my chest beginning to tighten even before I got out of bed. My younger sister Ashley was home for spring break from the University of Colorado, where she was studying pre-med with dreams of becoming a doctor. The irony of what would unfold still haunts me. She had always been the golden child, the one with perfect grades, the social butterfly who seemed to excel at everything effortlessly. Meanwhile, I was the sister who spent half her childhood in emergency rooms, missing family vacations because of respiratory flare-ups, and requiring constant vigilance from our parents about air quality, allergens, and stress levels. That morning, as I fumbled for my rescue inhaler on the nightstand, I noticed it felt slightly different in my hand. The weight seemed off, but I was too focused on the growing tightness in my chest to pay much attention. When I pressed down on the canister and inhaled deeply, expecting the familiar rush of medication that would open my airways, nothing happened. In fact, my breathing seemed to get worse. Panic began to set in as I took another puff, then another, desperately trying to get relief that wouldn't come. My morning routine had always been the same: wake up, take my maintenance inhaler, check the air quality forecast, and plan my day accordingly. Living in Denver meant dealing with altitude, air pollution, and seasonal allergies that could trigger attacks without warning. I had learned to read my body's signals, to catch the early warning signs before an attack became life-threatening. But that morning, despite following my usual routine, everything felt wrong. The rescue inhaler that should have contained albuterol, the fast-acting bronchodilator that had saved my life more times than I could count, seemed completely ineffective. Each puff I took felt like breathing in plain air, offering no relief whatsoever. My wheezing became more pronounced, and that familiar feeling of drowning while surrounded by air began to overwhelm me. This wasn't just a bad asthma day, something was fundamentally different about my medication. I stumbled out of my bedroom and down the hallway toward the kitchen, where I could hear my family starting their day. My parents, Linda and Robert Mitchell, were going through their usual morning routine. Mom was packing lunches for her job as a secretary at the local elementary school, while Dad was getting ready for another day at the construction site. Ashley sat at the kitchen table, leisurely eating cereal while scrolling through her phone, the picture of a carefree college student on vacation. When I appeared in the doorway, clearly struggling to breathe, my family's reactions were telling. Mom looked up with that familiar expression of mild annoyance mixed with concern that I had come to know so well over the years. Dad barely glanced away from his coffee and newspaper. But Ashley's reaction was the most disturbing of all. She looked almost expectant, like she was waiting to see what would happen next. "Having another one of your episodes?" Mom asked, her tone suggesting this was more of an inconvenience than a medical emergency. Over the years, my family had developed a troubling habit of minimizing my asthma attacks, treating them as routine disruptions rather than potentially life-threatening events. They had become desensitized to my condition, viewing my struggles to breathe as something I should have learned to manage better by now. I tried to explain that my inhaler wasn't working, that something was wrong with my medication, but speaking required air I didn't have. Each word was a struggle, each sentence broken by wheezing and gasping. Ashley looked up from her phone, with what appeared to be genuine concern, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. Something that should have been a warning sign if I had been thinking clearly enough to recognize it. Maybe you're just having a really bad attack, Ashley suggested helpfully. Sometimes they're worse than usual, right? Maybe you need to go to the hospital. Her suggestion seemed reasonable on the surface, but there was an odd eagerness in her voice, as if she was hoping I would need medical intervention. Dad folded his newspaper with an audible sigh. Jess, you're 24 years old. You should know how to handle this by now. Your sister's right, if it's that bad, maybe you need to go get checked out, but don't expect us to drop everything and rush you there like when you were a kid. His dismissive attitude stung, but I was too focused on trying to breathe to fully process the emotional impact of his words. The attack was getting worse, not better, and I knew from experience that this was the point where I needed to seek emergency medical care. My rescue inhaler should have provided at least some relief by now, but instead, my breathing was becoming more labored with each passing minute. My oxygen saturation was clearly dropping. I could feel that familiar lightheadedness that came with inadequate oxygen reaching my brain. I managed to gasp out that I needed to go to the hospital, that something was seriously wrong. Mom rolled her eyes and muttered something about me being dramatic again, but she grabbed her purse anyway. The drive to Denver General Medical Center felt like an eternity, with me struggling to breathe in the back seat while Ashley sat beside me, occasionally asking if I was okay in a voice that sounded more curious than concerned. By the time we reached the emergency room, I was in full respiratory distress. The triage nurse took one look at me and immediately called for a wheelchair and oxygen. As they wheeled me into a treatment room, I could hear Mom explaining to the medical staff that I had a history of asthma and was probably just having a bad attack, nothing too serious. Her casual dismissal of my condition to the healthcare professionals felt like another betrayal on top of the physical crisis I was experiencing. The emergency room physician, Dr. Patricia Green, was a pulmonologist who specialized in respiratory emergencies. She took one look at my condition and immediately ordered oxygen therapy, nebulizer treatments, and a series of tests. What she found would change everything. After administering several breathing treatments that gradually brought my oxygen levels back to normal, she examined my rescue inhaler with a puzzled expression. "Jessica, when did you last refill this prescription?" she asked, holding up the inhaler I had been using that morning. When I told her it had been refilled just the week before.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
She frowned and made some notes in my chart. "I want to run some tests on this medication. Something about your response to treatment doesn't match what I would expect from your typical asthma presentation." In the meantime, she kept me for observation and continued monitoring my breathing. The nebulizer treatments were working, which confirmed that my airways were responding to proper medication, but she remained concerned about why my rescue inhaler had been completely ineffective. She ordered blood tests, chest x-rays, and most importantly, decided to have the contents of my inhaler analyzed by the hospital pharmacy. My family waited in the emergency room with varying degrees of patience. Mom kept checking her watch and mentioning that she needed to get to work, while Dad paced the waiting area, clearly annoyed at having to spend his morning in a hospital. Ashley, however, seemed unusually attentive, asking detailed questions about the tests being run and showing what appeared to be genuine medical curiosity about my condition. When Dr. Green returned several hours later, her expression was grave. She asked to speak with me privately, which immediately put my family on edge. In the privacy of the treatment room, she delivered news that would shatter my understanding of what had been happening to me. Jessica, we've analyzed the contents of your rescue inhaler, she began carefully. What we found was not albuterol. The canister contained a saline solution, essentially salt water. It's completely harmless, but it has no therapeutic effect whatsoever for asthma. She paused, watching my reaction. This means that when you were having your attack this morning, you were essentially trying to treat it with nothing more than mist. The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow. Someone had tampered with my medication, replacing life-saving medicine with a useless substitute. Dr. Green continued, I need to ask you some difficult questions, Jessica. Who has access to your medications? Have you noticed anything unusual about your inhalers recently? Any changes in effectiveness, appearance, or response to treatment? As I thought back over the previous months, a horrifying pattern began to emerge. I had been having more frequent attacks that seemed to respond poorly to my rescue medication. I had attributed this to worsening asthma, possibly due to stress from work or seasonal allergies, but now I realized that my medication had likely been compromised for much longer than just that morning. Dr. Green's next words chilled me to the bone. Jessica, what happened to you today could have been fatal. If someone is deliberately tampering with your asthma medication, this isn't a prank or a joke, this is attempted murder. I need to contact the hospital social worker and possibly law enforcement. Someone tried to kill you today, and they nearly succeeded. The room seemed to spin as the full reality of the situation sank in. Someone I trusted, someone with access to my medications, had been systematically sabotaging my treatment for months. The worst part was realizing that this person had been watching me suffer, watching me struggle to breathe, knowing that they were the cause of my deteriorating condition. When Dr. Green called my family back into the room to explain the situation, their reactions were telling. Mom immediately went into denial mode, insisting that there must be some mistake, that no one in our family would ever do such a thing. Dad became angry, demanding to know how the hospital could make such serious accusations without proof. But Ashley's reaction was the most disturbing of all. She went completely pale and quiet, her usual confident demeanor cracking for just a moment, before she quickly composed herself. That's impossible, Ashley said, her voice slightly shaky. Who would do something like that? Jess must have gotten a defective inhaler from the pharmacy. These things happen, right? Manufacturing errors. Her explanation sounded plausible, but there was something desperate in her voice that made Dr. Green take notice. Dr. Green wasn't buying the manufacturing error explanation. Miss Mitchell, pharmaceutical manufacturing is strictly regulated, and albuterol inhalers don't get accidentally filled with saline solution. This was deliberate tampering. Someone opened this canister and replaced the medication with a harmless but ineffective substitute. She looked directly at each family member as she spoke. I'm required by law to report this as a potential attempted homicide. The police will need to investigate. The word homicide hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My parents immediately began protesting, talking about family loyalty and how we needed to handle this privately. Ashley suggested that maybe I had enemies at work, or that someone at the pharmacy might have tampered with my medication, but Dr. Green was adamant that this was now a criminal matter that required police involvement. Detective Mark Torres arrived at the hospital within an hour of Dr. Green's call. He was a veteran investigator who specialized in domestic violence and family-related crimes. His presence made the situation feel suddenly real and terrifying. This wasn't just a medical emergency anymore, it was a criminal investigation with me as the victim and my own family members as potential suspects. Detective Torres interviewed each of us separately, starting with me. He asked detailed questions about my medication routine, who had access to my inhalers, and whether I had noticed any changes in my symptoms or treatment effectiveness over the past several months. As I answered his questions, the timeline of my deteriorating condition began to correlate with Ashley's visits home from college. When he interviewed my family members, their stories didn't quite align. Mom and Dad insisted that our family was close-knit and that no one would ever harm me, but Ashley's answers were evasive and contradictory. She claimed to know nothing about asthma medications, despite being a pre-med student, and she seemed unusually nervous for someone who should have been outraged by the attempt on her sister's life. Dr. Green made the decision to keep me in the hospital overnight for observation, both for medical reasons and for my safety. She prescribed new inhalers from the hospital pharmacy and implemented strict security protocols to ensure that my medications couldn't be tampered with again. The nursing staff was instructed to keep my medications in a locked cabinet and to personally administer each dose. That night, as I lay in my hospital bed surrounded by monitors and safety protocols, I began to piece together the horrifying truth about what had been happening to me. My sister, who was studying to become a doctor, who should have understood better than anyone how dangerous it was to interfere with someone's life-saving medication, had been systematically poisoning me for months. The question that haunted me as I tried to sleep was why. What could have driven her to attempt murder, and how long had this been going on? The investigation was just beginning, but already the foundation of my trust in my family was crumbling. Green had explained that my condition should have been much better controlled than it had been, and now I understood why. Every attack that had sent me to the emergency room, every missed day of work, every moment of gasping for air, had been orchestrated by someone who claimed to love me. The betrayal was almost as suffocating as the asthma attacks themselves. As the night wore on, nurses checked on me regularly, monitoring my breathing and ensuring that I was responding well to the actual medication. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe easily, like my inhalers were actually working the way they were supposed to. It was a bitter relief, knowing that my improvement was only possible because I was finally receiving real medication instead of the useless substitute my sister had been providing. The worst part was realizing that this was just the beginning. If Ashley had been willing to risk my life to satisfy whatever twisted psychological need was driving her actions, what other damage had she done? How many other times had she sabotaged my health while pretending to be a caring sister? The investigation would reveal answers that I wasn't sure I was ready to hear, but I knew I needed to face the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. Part 2. Relationship dynamic and dismissal. The morning after my hospitalization, the dynamics in our family home became crystal clear in ways I had never noticed before. Ashley had always been the star of our family, the daughter who brought home perfect report cards, who never caused any trouble, who made our parents beam with pride at every school event. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who required constant medical attention, whose asthma attacks disrupted family plans, whose rescue inhalers had to be strategically placed throughout every room of the house. Growing up, I had attributed Ashley's occasional coldness toward me to normal sibling rivalry. She would make comments that seemed innocent enough on the surface, but carried an underlying sting that I couldn't quite identify. When I missed her high school graduation because of a severe asthma attack that landed me in the emergency room, she had smiled sweetly while saying, "At least now you won't have to pretend to be proud of me." When I couldn't attend her college acceptance celebration dinner because exposure to the restaurant's smoky atmosphere would have triggered an attack, she had hugged me goodbye while whispering, "Don't worry, Jess, we all know you'd rather be the center of attention in a hospital bed anyway." These comments had hurt at the time, but I had dismissed them as the typical jealousy that exists between siblings. I thought Ashley was just frustrated that my medical condition sometimes took precedence over her achievements. What I failed to recognize was the calculated nature of her resentment, the way she had been building a case in her mind that I was somehow manipulating our family with my illness. Our parents had unknowingly fed into this dynamic over the years. Every time I had an asthma attack, their attention would immediately shift to me, regardless of what Ashley was doing or what she might have needed. During family vacations, we had to choose hotels and activities based on air quality and my ability to participate. Restaurant choices were limited by my need to avoid smoke and certain allergens. Ashley's friends couldn't come over when I was having a particularly bad asthma day because additional people in the house meant more potential triggers. Dr. Patricia Green had called the house that morning to check on my condition and to discuss the ongoing investigation into my medication tampering. When Mom answered the phone, I could hear the tension in her voice as she spoke to the doctor. After hanging up, she turned to Ashley and me with an expression that clearly indicated she wanted this entire situation to disappear. The doctor says they're going to involve more investigators, Mom announced, her voice carrying a tone of frustration rather than concern for my safety. She wants to examine all of your medications, Jess, and she's asking questions about who has access to them. This is getting completely out of hand. We're talking about our family here, not some criminal organization. Ashley sat at the kitchen table, stirring her coffee with deliberate slowness, her pre-med textbooks spread out in front of her, as if she were just another concerned sister trying to study while dealing with a family crisis. It's really unfortunate that this happened, she said carefully, not looking directly at either Mom or me. I mean, if someone really did tamper with Jess's medication, that's absolutely terrible, but maybe we should consider that there could be other explanations. Manufacturing defects happen more often than people think. The way Ashley spoke about the tampering, as if it were something that had happened to me, rather than something that someone had done to me, struck me as odd. She seemed to be maintaining emotional distance from the situation, discussing it like an academic case study, rather than an attempt on her sister's life. Her clinical detachment was particularly unsettling, given that she was studying medicine and should have understood the severity of what had occurred. Dad came downstairs, already dressed for work, clearly annoyed that this situation was continuing to disrupt the family routine. I don't understand why we need to involve the police in what's obviously a pharmacy error, he said, pouring himself coffee with more force than necessary. Jess, you've been managing your asthma for years. Maybe you just got a bad batch of medication. These things happen. Why does everything have to become a federal case? His dismissive attitude toward what Dr. Green had clearly explained was deliberate tampering, revealed a troubling pattern in how our family dealt with problems. Rather than facing difficult truths, they preferred to find simple explanations that allowed them to avoid uncomfortable realities. The idea that someone in our family might have attempted to murder me was so far outside their worldview that they were willing to ignore clear evidence rather than confront it. Ashley nodded along with Dad's assessment, adding, "Exactly. And even if someone did tamper with the medication, it might not have been intentional. Maybe someone was curious about how inhalers work and accidentally damaged it. Or maybe someone was trying to help by cleaning it and used the wrong solution. There are lots of innocent explanations for what happened." The fact that Ashley was generating multiple alternative theories for the tampering, each one designed to minimize the criminal intent behind the action, should have been a red flag. A truly innocent person would have been outraged by the attempt on my life, demanding answers and justice. Instead, she seemed focused on creating reasonable doubt about whether a crime had actually been committed. Dr. Green had scheduled a follow-up appointment for later that morning, and she had specifically requested that my entire family attend. She wanted to discuss the ongoing investigation and to establish safety protocols for my medication management going forward. The appointment would also give Detective Torres another opportunity to observe our family dynamics and to ask additional questions about the timeline of events. During the drive to the medical center, the tension in our car was palpable. Mom kept mentioning how this situation was affecting her work, how she was having to take time off to deal with what she still insisted was probably just a misunderstanding. Dad complained about missing a day of construction work during a busy season, emphasizing the financial impact this investigation was having on our family. Ashley sat in the back seat beside me, occasionally reaching over to pat my hand, in what appeared to be a gesture of sisterly support. "Everything's going to be fine, Jess," she said soothingly. "Once they figure out what really happened, this will all blow over. We just need to stick together as a family and not let outside influences tear us apart." Her words sounded supportive on the surface, but there was something manipulative about the way she emphasized family unity and outside influences. She seemed to be framing the medical professionals and law enforcement officers as threats to our family rather than people who were trying to protect my life. This attempt to create an us versus them mentality was particularly troubling given that the them in this scenario were the people working to prevent my murder. When we arrived at Dr. Green's office, Detective Torres was already there, along with a hospital social worker named Sarah Kim, who specialized in cases involving family violence. The presence of additional professionals made the situation feel even more serious and real. This wasn't just a medical consultation anymore, it was a formal investigation into attempted murder. Dr. Green began the meeting by reviewing the results of the laboratory analysis of my inhaler contents. The report confirmed that the medication had been completely replaced with sterile saline solution, a substitution that required deliberate action and some degree of medical knowledge. The process of emptying an inhaler canister and refilling it with a different substance wasn't something that could happen accidentally or as the result of a manufacturing error. The tampering we discovered was sophisticated, Green explained, looking directly at each family member as she spoke. Someone carefully removed the original medication, cleaned the canister, and refilled it with a substance that would appear normal but provide no therapeutic benefit. This required planning, knowledge of how inhalers work, and access to medical supplies. Detective Torres took over the explanation, discussing the criminal implications of what had been discovered. "What we're dealing with here is attempted murder," he said bluntly. "Someone deliberately disabled Jessica's life-saving medication, knowing that she could die without proper treatment during an asthma attack. This wasn't a prank or a mistake, this was a calculated attempt to cause serious harm or death." The reaction from my family members was telling. Mom immediately began protesting that no one in our family would ever do such a thing, that we needed to look at other possibilities, like disgruntled pharmacy employees or random tampering by strangers. Dad echoed her sentiments, suggesting that the investigation was moving too quickly and jumping to conclusions without considering all the evidence. But Ashley's reaction was the most revealing. Instead of expressing outrage or demanding justice for the attempt on my life, she seemed focused on procedural questions about the investigation. She asked about the reliability of the laboratory tests, whether there might have been contamination of the samples, and whether other cases of medication tampering had been reported in our area. Her questions sounded like those of someone looking for ways to discredit the evidence, rather than someone seeking justice for their sister. Sarah Kim, the social worker, had been observing our family dynamics throughout the meeting, and she asked to speak with me privately. In a separate office, she explained that the pattern of behavior she was seeing was consistent with cases involving family members who harm relatives with medical conditions. "Jessica, what I'm seeing here is a family that's more concerned with protecting their reputation than with protecting your life," she said gently. "That's a serious red flag in cases like this." She asked about my relationship with Ashley, whether I had noticed any changes in her behavior around the time my asthma symptoms had worsened, and whether I felt safe continuing to live in the same house with her. These questions forced me to confront the possibility that my own sister had been trying to kill me, a reality that was almost too devastating to accept. When we reconvened as a group, Dr. Green outlined the safety protocols that would need to be implemented immediately. My medications would need to come from a different pharmacy, one that Ashley had never visited. The inhalers would need to be stored in a locked container that only I had access to. Most importantly, I would need to consider whether it was safe for me to continue living in a home where someone had already attempted to murder me. The suggestion that I might need to move out of my family home was met with immediate resistance from my parents. They insisted that our family could work through this problem together, that involving outsiders would only make things worse, and that I was overreacting to what was probably just an unfortunate accident. Their focus remained on preserving family unity rather than ensuring my safety. Ashley supported their position, arguing that separating our family would be traumatic for everyone involved and that it would prevent us from healing together. "We need each other right now," she said, her voice full of apparent sincerity. "If Jess moves out, it's like we're admitting that someone in our family is a criminal. That's not who we are." But Dr. Green and Detective Torres were clear about the risks of me remaining in the same environment where the tampering had occurred. The person responsible for sabotaging my medication was still free and still had access to me. Until the investigation was complete and the perpetrator was identified and arrested, my safety required removing me from the situation entirely. The meeting ended with my parents agreeing to the immediate safety protocols but refusing to accept that I needed to leave home. They signed documents acknowledging the seriousness of the situation and agreeing to cooperate with the investigation, but their attitude remained one of reluctant compliance rather than genuine concern for my well-being. As we left the medical center, Ashley walked beside me, maintaining her facade of sisterly support. "I know this is scary, Jess," she said softly, "but we're going to get through this together. Whoever did this to you, we'll find them, and we'll make sure it never happens again. You can count on me to help protect you." The irony of her words, coming from someone who I was beginning to suspect had been the one trying to kill me, was almost too much to bear. But I wasn't ready to confront her directly yet. I needed more evidence, more proof of what she had been doing, before I could accept that my own sister was capable of such betrayal. Part 3: Crisis Point and Emergency. The drive home from Dr. Green's office felt like traveling through a minefield of unspoken tensions and barely contained emotions. Ashley sat beside me in the back seat, occasionally making concerned comments about my well-being, while our parents discussed their frustration with what they continued to characterize as an overreaction by the medical professionals. The disconnect between their perception of the situation and the reality that someone had tried to murder me was becoming increasingly clear and disturbing. When we arrived home, Ashley immediately went to her room, claiming she needed to study for upcoming exams. Mom busied herself with household tasks, muttering under her breath about the disruption this investigation was causing to the family routine. Dad disappeared into the garage, where he typically went when he wanted to avoid dealing with family problems. I was left alone in the living room, surrounded by the same environment where someone had been systematically poisoning me for months. Dr. Green had given me new inhalers from the hospital pharmacy, along with strict instructions about their storage and use. The rescue inhaler was to remain on my person at all times, and the maintenance inhaler was to be kept in a locked box that she had provided. These precautions felt both necessary and surreal. The idea that I needed to protect my life-saving medication from my own family members was a reality I was still struggling to accept. That afternoon, I decided to examine my room more carefully, looking for signs that someone had been accessing my medications without my knowledge. What I found was disturbing in its subtlety. My inhaler storage area, a small basket on my nightstand where I kept my rescue inhaler and other medical supplies, showed signs of being disturbed. Items were arranged slightly differently than I remembered, and there was a faint residue on the surface that hadn't been there before. More troubling was the discovery of a small notebook hidden behind my dresser, apparently dropped and forgotten during one of Ashley's visits to my room. The notebook contained what appeared to be medical observations written in Ashley's handwriting, documenting my asthma symptoms, attack frequency, and responses to medication. The entries were clinical and detached, reading more like a research study than the concerned observations of a loving sister. One entry, dated 3 weeks earlier, read subject experienced moderate attack after morning jog. Rescue inhaler provided minimal relief. Attack duration approximately 45 minutes before subsiding naturally. Note subject becoming suspicious of medication effectiveness, may need to adjust approach. The coldness of the language, referring to me as subject rather than using my name, revealed a level of emotional detachment that was chilling. Another entry from a month before that was even more disturbing. Increased dosage of substitute solution. Subject required emergency room visit, but was discharged after standard treatment. Family expressed appropriate level of concern without becoming overly suspicious. Timing of intervention appears optimal for maintaining plausible deniability. Reading these entries felt like discovering that my life had been reduced to a twisted experiment, with Ashley serving as both researcher and torturer. The clinical terminology and methodical documentation revealed a level of premeditation that went far beyond a spontaneous prank or moment of jealous anger. This was systematic, calculated, and ongoing torture disguised as medical research. I photographed the notebook pages with my phone, knowing that this evidence would be crucial for Detective Torres's investigation. The documentation provided a timeline of Ashley's activities and proved that the medication tampering had been going on for much longer than anyone had initially suspected. It also revealed that she had been carefully monitoring my responses to ensure that her sabotage was effective without being immediately discovered. As I was photographing the evidence, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Quickly hiding the notebook back where I had found it, I pretended to be organizing my medications according to Dr. Green's new protocols. Ashley appeared in my doorway, her expression curious and slightly concerned. "How are you feeling, Jess?" she asked, stepping into my room uninvited. "I know today was really overwhelming with all those questions and accusations. It must be so scary to think that someone would want to hurt you like that." Her tone was sympathetic, but her eyes were calculating, scanning my room as if looking for signs of what I had been doing. I mumbled something about feeling tired and wanting to rest, hoping she would leave so I could process what I had discovered. But Ashley seemed determined to stay, settling herself on my bed as if preparing for a long conversation. "I've been thinking about what the doctor said today," she continued, "about how sophisticated the tampering was. It really makes you wonder who could have done something like that. Someone with medical knowledge, someone who had access to your medications." The way she discussed the crime, almost as if she were helping to solve it rather than being the perpetrator, was deeply unsettling. She seemed to be fishing for information about what I knew or suspected, while simultaneously trying to direct suspicion away from herself and toward external possibilities. "Have you considered that maybe someone at your work might have access to your purse?" Ashley suggested. "Or maybe someone you've dated recently. Sometimes people can seem completely normal but have hidden agendas. You know, stalkers and obsessive people who become fixated on someone with a medical condition." Her suggestions were creative and plausible, designed to make me question whether the threat was really coming from within our family. This misdirection strategy revealed a sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation that was far beyond what I would have expected from sibling rivalry. Ashley wasn't just trying to hurt me physically, she was trying to control my perception of reality and my ability to identify the true source of the danger. As she continued talking, suggesting various external suspects and alternative theories, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Ashley was wearing a small pendant necklace that I had never seen before, and hanging from it was a tiny key. The key looked remarkably similar to the type used for small locks, possibly including the type of lock on my medication storage container. When I asked about the necklace, Ashley's hand immediately went to her throat, covering the pendant as if she hadn't realized she was wearing it. "Oh, it's just a little key I found. I thought it was cute, so I made it into a necklace. You know how I like unique jewelry." Her explanation was casual, but the defensive gesture and the slight change in her voice suggested that the key had more significance than she was admitting. The conversation was interrupted by Mom calling us for dinner, and Ashley quickly left my room, but not before glancing back at me with an expression that seemed almost predatory. During dinner, the family discussion centered around their continued frustration with the investigation and their belief that the whole situation was being blown out of proportion. "I talked to your Aunt Carol today," Mom announced, "and she thinks we should consider hiring a lawyer. Not because anyone in our family did anything wrong, but because these investigators seem determined to find someone to blame, and sometimes innocent people get caught up in these witch hunts." Dad nodded in agreement, adding, "The way that detective was looking at all of us today, like we're criminals or something. It's insulting. We're a good family. We take care of each other. Just because Jess had a bad reaction to some defective medication doesn't mean we need to be treated like suspects." Ashley supported their position enthusiastically, suggesting that the investigation was actually harmful to my recovery process. "All this stress and suspicion can't be good for Jess's asthma," she said with apparent concern. "Maybe we should ask the doctor to scale back the investigation until Jess is feeling stronger. The last thing we want is for all this drama to trigger more attacks." The irony of Ashley expressing concern about stress triggering my asthma attacks, when she had been the one deliberately causing those attacks for months, was almost too much to bear. But I wasn't ready to confront her directly yet. I needed to get the evidence I had discovered to Detective Torres and let the professionals handle the confrontation. After dinner, I excused myself early, claiming I needed to rest and follow Dr. Green's instructions for monitoring my breathing. In the privacy of my room, I called Detective Torres and arranged to meet him the following morning to turn over the notebook I had found. He was immediately interested in what I had discovered and praised me for being observant and careful in documenting the evidence. "Jessica, what you found could be the break we need in this case," he said over the phone. "The kind of detailed documentation you're describing suggests we're dealing with someone who has been planning and executing this campaign against you for a significant period of time. This isn't impulsive behavior, this is calculated and ongoing attempted murder." That night, I implemented the security protocols Dr. Green had recommended, locking my medications in the provided container and keeping the rescue inhaler on my person at all times. But even with these precautions, I felt vulnerable and exposed in my own home. The person who had been trying to kill me was sleeping just down the hall, and my parents seemed more concerned with protecting her than with protecting me. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room. The sounds were soft and deliberate, as if someone was trying to move without being detected. My door handle turned slowly, and I could see a shadowy figure trying to enter my room. Pretending to be asleep, I watched through barely opened eyes as Ashley crept into my room, moving directly toward my nightstand where I used to keep my medications. When she discovered that my medications were no longer in their usual location, she began searching more thoroughly, opening drawers and looking behind furniture. Her movements were systematic and practiced, suggesting that this wasn't the first time she had conducted such a search. After several minutes of fruitless searching, she gave up and crept back out of my room, but not before standing at the foot of my bed for a long moment, staring at me in the darkness. The next morning, I met Detective Torres at a coffee shop near the hospital, far from any location where my family might accidentally encounter us. When I showed him the photographs of Ashley's notebook, his expression became grim and focused. The evidence I had discovered provided a clear timeline of the medication tampering and revealed the systematic nature of what had been done to me. "This is exactly what we needed," Detective Torres explained. "This documentation proves premeditation, ongoing criminal activity, and most importantly, it identifies your sister as the perpetrator. The clinical language and methodical approach also suggest that she's been treating this as some kind of twisted research project, which could be relevant to additional charges." He explained that the notebook evidence, combined with the laboratory analysis of my tampered medication, provided sufficient grounds for an arrest warrant. However, he wanted to coordinate with Dr. Green and the hospital's social worker to ensure that my safety was protected throughout the arrest process. There was also the possibility that Ashley might have tampered with other medications, or might escalate her behavior if she realized she was about to be caught. The plan was for the arrest to take place that afternoon, while Ashley was at home, and I was safely away from the house. Detective Torres arranged for me to stay at the hospital during the arrest, both for my protection and to ensure that medical support was available if I experienced any stress-related asthma symptoms. Dr. Green would be standing by to provide care if needed. As I prepared for what would be the most devastating day of my life, the day when my sister would be arrested for trying to murder me, I reflected on all the signs I had missed, all the red flags I had dismissed as normal sibling behavior. The evidence was clear and undeniable, but the emotional reality of accepting that Ashley had been trying to kill me was almost as difficult to breathe through as the asthma attacks she had been causing. Part 4. Expert authority intervention. Detective Torres had coordinated the arrest carefully, ensuring that multiple law enforcement agencies were involved and that all evidence was properly documented. When I arrived at the hospital that afternoon, to wait in safety while the arrest took place, Dr. Green was already there with additional medical staff, prepared to provide support both for my physical condition and for the emotional trauma of having a family member arrested for attempting to murder me. The arrest took place at 3:30 p.m., while Ashley was home alone, studying for her pre-med exams in what she had probably assumed was a completely normal afternoon. Detective Torres later described the scene to me. When they arrived with the warrant, Ashley initially maintained her innocent facade, expressing shock and confusion about why law enforcement would want to speak with her. She claimed to be worried about me and eager to help with the investigation in any way possible. However, when Detective Torres presented the evidence from her notebook, her demeanor changed dramatically. The clinical documentation of her systematic poisoning campaign was undeniable, written in her own handwriting, and containing details that only the perpetrator could have known. Faced with irrefutable proof of her crimes, Ashley's carefully constructed mask of sisterly concern began to crack. According to the arrest report, Ashley's first reaction was to try to minimize the severity of what she had done. She claimed that she had been conducting a research project for her pre-med studies, that she hadn't intended to cause serious harm, and that she had been carefully monitoring my condition to ensure that nothing truly dangerous happened. This explanation revealed a fundamental lack of understanding about the gravity of her actions and a disturbing disconnection from the reality of what attempted murder actually means. When Detective Torres explained that people with severe asthma can die within minutes of being unable to access effective medication, Ashley seemed genuinely surprised. Her response, as documented in the police report, was chilling in its casual dismissal of my life, but Jess always recovers from her attacks eventually. I was just making them last a little longer, so she'd understand what it feels like to struggle for something that everyone else takes for granted. Dr. Green had been consulted during the arrest process to provide medical expertise about the potential consequences of Ashley's actions. Her assessment was clear and damning: the systematic replacement of my life-saving medication with ineffective substitutes had created multiple situations where I could have died. The fact that I had survived was due to luck and quick medical intervention, not to any precautions Ashley had taken to protect my life. What your sister did wasn't research, Dr. Green explained to me as we waited for news of the arrest. It was torture. She created a situation where you were repeatedly placed in life-threatening danger while being denied the medication that could save you. The psychological component of watching you suffer while knowing she was the cause adds another layer of cruelty to this crime. The hospital social worker, Sarah Kim, had also been present during the arrest to observe Ashley's behavior and to provide professional assessment of her mental state. Her preliminary evaluation suggested that Ashley exhibited signs of narcissistic personality disorder combined with a dangerous lack of empathy for others. The clinical way she had documented my suffering, referring to me as a subject rather than her sister, indicated a level of dehumanization that was deeply concerning. When my parents were contacted about Ashley's arrest, their reaction was exactly what I had come to expect: immediate denial, blame directed at the investigators, and demands for a lawyer. They insisted that there had been some kind of mistake, that Ashley would never hurt anyone, and that the evidence had been misinterpreted or fabricated. Their refusal to accept the reality of what their daughter had done to me felt like another betrayal on top of the attempted murder itself. Mom arrived at the police station within an hour of Ashley's arrest, demanding to speak with Detective Torres and insisting that he release her daughter immediately. According to witnesses, she became increasingly agitated when told that Ashley was being charged with attempted murder, accusing the police of targeting their family and destroying an innocent young woman's future career in medicine. Dad's reaction was equally disturbing, but took a different form. Rather than expressing concern for my safety or outrage about the attempt on my life, he focused on the impact this arrest would have on Ashley's education and career prospects. He asked Detective Torres whether the charges could be reduced to something less serious, whether Ashley could be released to the family's custody, and whether there was any way to handle this matter privately without involving the courts. The disconnect between my parents' priorities and the reality of what had happened to me was stunning. Their immediate instinct was to protect Ashley from the consequences of her actions, rather than to ensure my safety or to seek justice for the systematic campaign of attempted murder she had waged against me. This reaction validated everything the medical professionals and law enforcement officers had told me about family dynamics in cases like this. Ashley's behavior during the booking process provided additional insight into her psychological state. According to the jail staff, she seemed more concerned about missing her upcoming exams than about the severity of the charges against her. She asked repeatedly about when she would be released so she could return to her studies, apparently still believing that this was all some kind of misunderstanding that would be quickly resolved. When offered the opportunity to make a phone call, Ashley chose to call Mom rather than a lawyer, and the conversation was recorded as part of standard jail procedures. In that call, she maintained her innocence while simultaneously providing more evidence of her guilt. She told Mom that the notebook the police had found was just research notes for a class project, but then went on to discuss details about my medication and symptoms that revealed intimate knowledge of the tampering campaign. Dr. Green received a copy of this recorded conversation and shared relevant excerpts with me as part of my ongoing medical care. Hearing Ashley discuss my condition in such clinical detached terms was perhaps more disturbing than reading her written documentation. She talked about my asthma attacks as if they were data points in an experiment, rather than life-threatening medical emergencies experienced by her sister. The legal process moved quickly once Ashley was in custody. The district attorney's office assigned a prosecutor who specialized in domestic violence and attempted murder cases, recognizing that this wasn't just a simple assault, but a sophisticated campaign of medical torture. The prosecutor, Jennifer Martinez, met with me the day after Ashley's arrest to discuss the evidence and to prepare me for what would be a complex legal process. "What your sister did to you represents one of the most calculating and cruel cases of attempted murder I've seen," Prosecutor Martinez explained. "The systematic nature of the poisoning, the documentation of your suffering, and the medical knowledge required to carry out this campaign all point to someone who knew exactly what she was doing and chose to do it anyway." The charges against Ashley were extensive: attempted murder in the first degree, aggravated assault, tampering with medication, reckless endangerment, and several other felonies related to the systematic nature of her crimes. Each tampering incident was treated as a separate offense, meaning that Ashley was facing multiple felony counts that could result in decades in prison if she was convicted. The medical evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Green had compiled a comprehensive report documenting the timeline of my declining health, the correlation between Ashley's visits home and my increased symptoms, and the immediate improvement in my condition once I began receiving untampered medication. Laboratory analysis of my previous blood samples, stored as part of routine medical care, revealed traces of foreign substances that corresponded with Ashley's documented tampering schedule. Ashley's defense attorney, hired by my parents, attempted to argue that this was all a misunderstanding, that Ashley had been trying to help me by conducting research into alternative treatments for asthma. However, this defense was undermined by Ashley's own documentation, which clearly showed that she knew her actions were harmful and was deliberately causing me to suffer. The defense also tried to argue that Ashley's actions hadn't actually endangered my life, since I had survived all of the attacks she had caused. Dr. Green's testimony destroyed this argument by explaining that survival doesn't negate attempted murder, and that several of my attacks had been severe enough that death could have occurred if medical intervention had been delayed by even a few minutes. Perhaps the most damaging evidence against Ashley came from her own words during police interviews. Initially, she had tried to maintain her innocence, but as the evidence mounted, she began to reveal her true motivations. She expressed resentment about the attention my medical condition had brought me throughout our lives, anger about family plans that had been altered to accommodate my asthma, and jealousy about what she perceived as preferential treatment. "Everyone always worried about Jess," Ashley told Detective Torres during one recorded interview. "Everything revolved around her breathing problems, her medication schedule, her triggers. I wanted people to see what it was like when someone you cared about was really struggling, when they might actually lose something important instead of just getting attention for being sick." This statement revealed the twisted logic behind Ashley's campaign against me. She hadn't been trying to cure my asthma or help me in any way. She had been trying to make me suffer more so that others would appreciate her struggles in comparison. The narcissistic focus on her own needs and the complete lack of empathy for my actual medical condition demonstrated a level of psychological disturbance that went far beyond normal sibling rivalry. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Ashley had been researching my medical condition and potential treatments, not to help me but to find more effective ways to sabotage my care. Her computer search history revealed visits to medical websites, forums discussing asthma management, and even research into medications that could be dangerous when combined with asthma treatments. Detective Torres discovered that Ashley had been in contact with other pre-med students who had access to medical supplies, ostensibly for study purposes, but actually to obtain the materials she needed for her tampering campaign. She had carefully planned each aspect of her crimes, from acquiring the substitute substances to timing her actions to avoid detection. The scope of Ashley's planning and the systematic nature of her crimes made it clear that this wasn't a case of someone who had made a single bad decision or who had acted impulsively during a moment of anger. This was a sustained campaign of attempted murder that had been carefully planned and methodically executed over a period of months. As the evidence continued to mount, Ashley's defense strategy began to shift toward trying to minimize her culpability by claiming mental health issues or family dysfunction. However, her own documentation worked against this strategy by demonstrating clear awareness of her actions and their consequences, along with deliberate planning and execution. The medical professionals involved in my care were unanimous in their assessment that Ashley's actions had placed me in mortal danger multiple times, and that her systematic approach to tampering with my medication represented one of the most serious cases of domestic attempted murder they had encountered. Their expert testimony would be crucial in ensuring that Ashley faced appropriate consequences for her crimes. Part 5: Pressure and Manipulation Tactics. The day after Ashley's arrest, my parents launched a coordinated campaign to pressure me into dropping the charges and supporting what they characterized as their family's time of crisis. Mom showed up at my workplace during my lunch break, tears streaming down her face, carrying printed photos of Ashley as a child and young adult. attempting to remind me of happier times when we had been close as sisters. "Look at these pictures, Jess," Mom pleaded, spreading the photographs across the table in the employee break room where several of my coworkers could overhear our conversation. "This is your sister we're talking about. The same little girl who used to bring you your inhaler when you were having attacks. She loves you. This whole thing is just a misunderstanding that's gotten completely out of control." The manipulation in Mom's approach was both transparent and effective. By conducting this conversation in public, she was putting social pressure on me to respond with apparent compassion and forgiveness. She was also rewriting history, portraying Ashley as someone who had been helpful with my medical condition rather than someone who had been systematically sabotaging it. The photos she had chosen showed Ashley and me during childhood moments that had nothing to do with the systematic campaign of attempted murder she had waged against me as an adult. When I tried to explain that the evidence against Ashley was overwhelming and that her actions could have killed me, Mom immediately dismissed my concerns as the product of stress and medical trauma. "You're not thinking clearly right now," she insisted. "The doctors have you scared and confused. Ashley would never hurt you. She's going to be a doctor herself. She understands how important your medication is." The irony of Mom using Ashley's medical training as evidence of her innocence, when that same training had enabled her to carry out such a sophisticated poisoning campaign, demonstrated the lengths to which my parents were willing to go to avoid facing reality. They were actively choosing to believe a comfortable lie rather than accept the documented evidence of what their daughter had done to me. Dad's approach was different, but equally manipulative. He focused on the financial and social consequences that Ashley's conviction would have on the entire family, painting me as selfish for pursuing justice at the expense of everyone else's well-being. He cornered me in the hospital parking lot after one of my follow-up appointments with Dr. Green, blocking my path to my car while he delivered what amounted to an ultimatum disguised as a heartfelt plea. "Do you have any idea what this is doing to our family?" Dad demanded, his voice carrying the same tone of frustrated authority he had used when disciplining me as a child. "Ashley's been expelled from her pre-med program. Her entire future in medicine is destroyed. Your mother hasn't been able to sleep or eat since the arrest. I'm missing work constantly to deal with lawyers and court appearances. This vendetta you're pursuing is tearing our family apart." The way Dad framed the situation made it clear that he viewed me as the aggressor rather than the victim. In his narrative, Ashley was the one suffering unjustly, and I was the one causing harm by insisting that she face consequences for trying to murder me. This complete inversion of reality demonstrated the powerful grip that denial had on my parents' ability to process what had actually happened. "She's your sister, Jess," Dad continued, stepping closer in a way that felt physically intimidating. "Sisters forgive each other. Sisters protect each other. What Ashley did might have been wrong, but it wasn't malicious. She was confused, maybe jealous, but she would never intentionally try to hurt you. You know that in your heart, this crusade you're on is going to destroy everyone you claim to love." The emotional manipulation in Dad's words was sophisticated and targeted. He was appealing to my sense of family loyalty while simultaneously gaslighting me about the nature of Ashley's crimes. By characterizing systematic attempted murder as confusion or jealousy, he was minimizing the severity of what had been done to me while making me responsible for protecting Ashley from the consequences of her own actions. When I tried to show Dad some of the evidence that Detective Torres had shared with me, including excerpts from Ashley's documentation of her poisoning campaign, he refused to look at it. "I don't need to see any of that," he said firmly. "I know my daughter and I know she's not a killer. Whatever those papers say, they're being misinterpreted by people who don't understand our family dynamics." This willful ignorance was perhaps more disturbing than the manipulation itself. Dad was making a conscious choice to remain uninformed about the evidence against Ashley because that ignorance allowed him to maintain his preferred version of reality. He was prioritizing his emotional comfort over my physical safety and his daughter's accountability for attempted murder. The pressure campaign escalated when my extended family became involved. Aunts, uncles, and cousins who had heard about Ashley's arrest began calling me to express their disbelief and to encourage me to reconsider my position. Most of these relatives had no knowledge of the evidence against Ashley, but they had been fed a narrative by my parents that portrayed her as the victim of an overzealous investigation and me as someone who was overreacting to a family dispute. My Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister, was particularly persistent in her efforts to convince me to drop the charges. She invited me to lunch under the pretense of providing emotional support, but the conversation quickly turned into a coordinated intervention designed to change my mind about pursuing prosecution. She had brought along my cousin Jennifer, who was studying psychology, to provide what they characterized as professional perspective on family trauma and healing. Jessica, what I'm seeing here is a family in crisis that needs healing, not punishment, Jennifer said, adopting the clinical tone she was learning in her graduate program. Sometimes when we've been hurt, our instinct is to seek revenge, but that doesn't actually help us process our trauma or rebuild our relationships. Have you considered that prosecuting Ashley might be preventing you from moving forward with your own recovery? The pseudo-psychological manipulation in Jennifer's approach was particularly insidious because it used therapeutic language to discourage me from seeking justice. She was framing my pursuit of accountability for attempted murder as a psychological problem rather than a reasonable response to a serious crime. This approach also ignored the reality that my safety required Ashley to face consequences that would prevent her from continuing to harm me. Aunt Patricia supported Jennifer's assessment, sharing stories about other families who had overcome serious conflicts through forgiveness and reconciliation. I've seen families destroyed by legal battles, she said sadly. Even when someone wins in court, everyone loses in the end. Ashley made a mistake, but she's still your sister, she's still our family. Putting her in prison won't undo what happened, but it will prevent your family from ever healing from this tragedy. The manipulation in these family interventions was multi-layered and sophisticated. They were appealing to my desire for family unity while ignoring the fact that true unity was impossible as long as Ashley remained free to continue her attempts to murder me. They were also reframing attempted murder as a mistake that could be resolved through forgiveness rather than as a serious crime that required justice and consequences. When these emotional appeals failed to change my position, the family pressure campaign took on more aggressive tactics. My parents began spreading their version of events to mutual friends, church members, and community acquaintances, portraying me as vindictive and unstable while characterizing Ashley as the victim of a misunderstanding. This social pressure was designed to isolate me and make me feel that I was the one causing harm by refusing to protect Ashley from prosecution. The church we had attended as a family became a particular source of pressure, with several congregation members reaching out to encourage me to embrace Christian forgiveness and family reconciliation. Pastor Williams, who had known our family for years, called to schedule a counseling session that was ostensibly about helping me process my trauma, but actually focused on convincing me to drop the charges against Ashley. Jessica, I've known you and Ashley since you were children, Pastor Williams said during our meeting in his office. I've watched you both grow into remarkable young women, and I know that the love between you is stronger than whatever has caused this current conflict. Ashley is suffering deeply from guilt and remorse about what happened. She needs your forgiveness, and frankly, you need to forgive her for your own spiritual well-being. The religious manipulation was particularly difficult to resist because it appealed to values that had been important to me throughout my life. Pastor Williams was framing forgiveness as a moral obligation while ignoring the reality that forgiveness didn't require me to enable Ashley to escape accountability for attempted murder. He was also assuming Ashley's remorse without any evidence that she actually felt guilty about trying to kill me. When I tried to explain to Pastor Williams that Ashley had shown no genuine remorse and had actually continued to minimize her actions even after her arrest, he dismissed my concerns as the product of anger and hurt that was preventing me from seeing Ashley's true heart. Sometimes people express remorse in ways that we don't immediately recognize, he suggested. Ashley's fear and confusion about this legal process might be masking her genuine regret about what happened. This pattern of dismissing my actual experiences and observations in favor of assumptions about Ashley's supposed good intentions was consistent across all of the family pressure tactics. Everyone who tried to convince me to drop the charges was asking me to ignore the documented evidence of Ashley's systematic campaign against me and instead base my decisions on speculation about her supposed hidden feelings of remorse. The pressure campaign reached its peak when Ashley herself was released on bail pending trial. My parents had mortgaged their house to pay for her bail and legal fees, a financial sacrifice that they repeatedly mentioned as evidence of their commitment to her defense and their belief in her innocence. Ashley's release meant that she was once again living in the family home, creating a situation where I was expected to interact with someone who had tried to murder me as if everything was normal. The first family gathering after Ashley's release was a surreal experience in cognitive dissonance and emotional manipulation. Mom had organized a family dinner to celebrate being together again, inviting extended family members who had been part of the pressure campaign to convince me to drop the charges. The entire event was staged to normalize Ashley's presence and to pressure me into behaving as if the attempted murder had never happened. Ashley played her part perfectly, appearing contrite and vulnerable while avoiding any direct acknowledgement of what she had done to me. She spoke in general terms about being sorry for the pain the family was experiencing and expressed hope that we could all heal together from this difficult time. Her carefully chosen words acknowledged the existence of a problem without taking specific responsibility for systematic attempted murder. "I know this has been really hard on everyone," Ashley said during the dinner, looking directly at me with an expression of apparent sincerity. "I never wanted anyone to get hurt, and I'm so sorry that things got so complicated and scary. I just want our family to be close again, the way we used to be when we were kids. I miss my big sister, and I hope we can work through this together." The emotional manipulation in Ashley's statement was masterful. She was appealing to nostalgia for our childhood relationship while avoiding any admission of guilt for trying to murder me. She was also framing the situation as something that had happened to the family rather than something she had deliberately done to me, reducing her role from perpetrator to fellow victim of unfortunate circumstances. The family members present at the dinner responded to Ashley's statement with visible emotion, several of them wiping away tears and expressing relief that she was showing such maturity and wisdom in handling this crisis. Mom immediately seized on Ashley's words as evidence that reconciliation was possible and that legal prosecution was unnecessary for achieving justice and healing. "You see," Mom said, looking around the table at everyone present, "this is what family love looks like. Ashley understands that she made mistakes and she wants to make things right. We don't need courts and lawyers to resolve this. We can heal together, the way families are supposed to do when someone gets hurt." The group pressure at that dinner was overwhelming. Every person present was invested in the narrative that Ashley was fundamentally good, that her actions had been the result of temporary confusion or jealousy, and that family reconciliation was both possible and preferable to criminal prosecution. My refusal to embrace this narrative made me appear stubborn, vindictive, and destructive to family unity. When I attempted to remind everyone that Ashley had systematically documented her campaign to poison me, referring to me as a research subject rather than her sister, the family members present immediately dismissed this evidence as the product of prosecutorial bias or misinterpretation. They were committed to their preferred version of reality and unwilling to consider information that contradicted their beliefs about Ashley's character. The dinner ended with everyone except me embracing Ashley and expressing their support for her during this difficult time. Several family members made pointed comments about the importance of forgiveness and family loyalty, clearly directed at me as the holdout who was preventing the family from moving forward. The social isolation was intense and designed to make me feel that I was choosing vengeance over love. After the dinner, Ashley approached me privately as I was preparing to leave. Away from the audience of family members, her demeanor shifted subtly but noticeably. The vulnerable, contrite persona she had displayed during dinner was replaced by something more calculating and manipulative. "You know, Jess," Ashley said quietly, "this legal thing is really hard on everyone, especially Mom and Dad. They're spending their retirement savings on lawyers and Mom's health is suffering from all the stress. I understand that you're angry about what happened, but is destroying our entire family really worth it? Is making me go to prison really going to make you feel better about having asthma? The manipulation in Ashley's private conversation was more direct and threatening than her public performance had been. She was making me responsible for the financial and emotional costs of her criminal prosecution, while simultaneously trivializing the systematic attempted murder as simply being angry about having asthma. She was also implying that my pursuit of justice was motivated by petty revenge rather than legitimate concern for my safety. When I reminded Ashley that she had tried to kill me multiple times, and that her own documentation proved the systematic and calculated nature of her actions, she shrugged dismissively. "That's your interpretation of what happened," she said calmly. "I was trying to help you understand what it felt like to struggle for something that other people take for granted. Maybe my methods weren't perfect, but my intentions were good. You're making this into something much bigger and more dramatic than it really was." This response revealed that Ashley had no genuine remorse for her actions and no real understanding of the severity of what she had done. She was still minimizing attempted murder as imperfect methods with good intentions, and she was still portraying me as overreacting to what she characterized as a minor family conflict. Her lack of empathy and continued manipulation made it clear that she remained a danger to my safety. The conversation ended with Ashley delivering what amounted to a veiled threat disguised as sisterly concern. "I really hope you'll think carefully about what you're doing," she said, her voice carrying an undertone that was more menacing than caring. "This legal process is going to be really hard on you too. All those court appearances, all that stress and publicity. You know how stress affects your asthma. It would be terrible if all this drama ended up making your condition worse." The implicit threat in Ashley's words was clear: continuing with the prosecution would result in stress that could trigger potentially dangerous asthma attacks. She was essentially threatening to use my medical condition against me if I didn't drop the charges, demonstrating that she remained focused on exploiting my vulnerability rather than taking responsibility for her crimes. That night, I called Detective Torres to report the family pressure campaign and Ashley's veiled threats. He was not surprised by what I described, explaining that this pattern of family manipulation was common in cases involving domestic violence and attempted murder within families. He also assured me that Ashley's threats would be documented and could result in additional charges if she continued to intimidate me. "What your family is doing to you is almost as harmful as what Ashley did," Detective Torres explained. "They're trying to gaslight you into believing that seeking justice for attempted murder makes you the bad person in this situation. That's not just manipulation, it's psychological abuse designed to protect Ashley from facing consequences for her crimes." Green also provided support and perspective when I described the family pressure campaign during my next medical appointment. She was particularly concerned about Ashley's implied threats regarding stress and asthma attacks, noting that this demonstrated continued intent to use my medical condition as a weapon against me. "The fact that Ashley is still thinking about ways to exploit your asthma tells me that she hasn't learned anything from being arrested," Dr. Green observed. "She's still viewing your medical condition as something she can manipulate for her own purposes. That makes her continued freedom a genuine threat to your safety, regardless of what your family believes about her supposed good intentions." The medical and legal professionals supporting my case were unanimous in their assessment that the family pressure campaign was both inappropriate and potentially dangerous. They encouraged me to maintain minimal contact with family members who were trying to manipulate me into dropping the charges and to document any threats or pressure tactics for potential use in court. The psychological toll of being pressured by my own family to protect the person who had tried to murder me was enormous. I was essentially being forced to choose between pursuing justice for attempted murder and maintaining relationships with family members who were more committed to protecting my attacker than to ensuring my safety. The isolation and emotional manipulation were almost as traumatic as the original crimes Ashley had committed against me. Sarah Kim, the hospital social worker, helped me understand that this family dynamic was not unusual in cases involving serious crimes between family members. She explained that families often prioritize maintaining their image of themselves as loving and functional over acknowledging that one member has committed serious crimes against another. What you're experiencing is a form of institutional betrayal, Sarah explained during one of our counseling sessions. The people who should be protecting you and seeking justice on your behalf are instead protecting your attacker and pressuring you to enable her escape from accountability. This secondary trauma can actually be more damaging than the original crime because it undermines your support system when you need it most. The counseling sessions with Sarah became crucial for maintaining my psychological stability as the family pressure campaign intensified. She helped me develop strategies for resisting manipulation, maintaining boundaries with family members, and focusing on my own safety and well-being rather than on their emotional needs and financial concerns. As Ashley's trial date approached, the family pressure reached fever pitch. My parents made increasingly desperate attempts to convince me to change my testimony or refuse to cooperate with the prosecution. They brought in additional relatives, family friends, and even former teachers who remembered Ashley as a good student and person, all trying to convince me that sending her to prison would be a tragedy that I would regret for the rest of my life. The final manipulation attempt came when Mom arranged for me to visit Ashley in jail, supposedly so that we could have a private conversation about our relationship and the future of our family. Mom presented this as an opportunity for healing and reconciliation, but it was actually a carefully orchestrated intervention designed to break down my resolve to testify against Ashley. The jail visit was emotionally devastating and manipulative in ways I hadn't anticipated. Seeing Ashley in jail clothing, looking vulnerable and diminished, was designed to evoke sympathy and guilt about the consequences she was facing. She had clearly prepared for this meeting, knowing exactly what emotional buttons to push to maximize the impact of her manipulation. "I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened," Ashley said, speaking through the jail phone while separated by reinforced glass. "I realize now that I was jealous and confused, and I handled my feelings in completely the wrong way. I never meant for things to go so far, and I never meant to hurt you the way I did. I'm getting counseling here, and I'm learning about how my jealousy and resentment affected my judgment." This carefully crafted apology was designed to sound genuine while avoiding specific admission of guilt for systematic attempted murder. Ashley was acknowledging general wrongdoing while framing her crimes as the result of emotions rather than calculated malice. She was also suggesting that she was already receiving treatment and rehabilitation, implying that formal prosecution was unnecessary. The visit continued with Ashley making emotional appeals about the impact incarceration was having on her education and future prospects. She spoke about losing her place in medical school, about the shame and stigma she would carry for the rest of her life, and about the financial burden her legal fees were placing on our parents. Each point was designed to make me feel responsible for the consequences she was facing for trying to murder me. The jail visit ended with Ashley making what appeared to be a heartfelt plea for forgiveness and reconciliation. "I know I can't undo what I did," she said, tears streaming down her face, "but I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you. If you give me a chance to prove that I've learned from this mistake, I promise I'll be the sister you deserve. Please don't let this destroy our family. Please give me the chance to show you how much I love you." The emotional manipulation in this final appeal was overwhelming, and it took all of my strength and the support of the professionals helping me to resist the pressure to drop the charges. Ashley's performance was convincing enough that it might have worked if I hadn't had access to her own documentation of her systematic campaign against me and the ongoing support of medical and legal professionals who understood the true nature of her crimes. Leaving the jail that day, I was emotionally exhausted, but more determined than ever to see the prosecution through to completion. The visit had shown me that Ashley remained focused on manipulation and avoiding accountability rather than on genuine remorse or rehabilitation. Her carefully rehearsed performance had actually strengthened my resolve to ensure that she faced appropriate consequences for systematically trying to murder me. Part 6, Initial Admission and Minimization. The weeks leading up to Ashley's preliminary hearing brought unexpected developments that would forever change how I understood the depth of her deception and the calculated nature of her crimes. Detective Torres called me early one Tuesday morning with news that Ashley's defense attorney had approached the prosecution about a potential plea agreement. the lawyer claimed that Ashley was ready to admit to some wrongdoing in exchange for reduced charges that wouldn't include attempted murder. Prosecutor Jennifer Martinez scheduled a meeting with me to discuss this development and to get my input on whether I would be willing to consider a plea deal. The conversation took place in her office downtown, a sterile environment that somehow made the gravity of the situation feel even more real. Martinez explained that Ashley's attorney was characterizing her actions as a series of pranks that had gone too far, claiming that she never intended to cause serious harm and had been monitoring my condition to ensure my safety. This is exactly the kind of minimization we expected, Martinez told me, reviewing the plea proposal that Ashley's lawyer had submitted. She's willing to admit to tampering with medication and causing reckless endangerment, but she wants to avoid the attempted murder charges by claiming her actions were motivated by sibling rivalry rather than homicidal intent. Her lawyer is painting this as a college student who made poor decisions, not a calculating individual who systematically tried to kill her sister. The plea proposal included Ashley admitting to replacing my medication with harmless substitutes on multiple occasions, but it characterized these actions as experiments designed to make me appreciate my medication rather than attempts to cause my death. According to her lawyer's narrative, Ashley had been trying to teach me a lesson about taking my health for granted, and any serious danger I had experienced was an unintended consequence of her misguided efforts to help me become more responsible about my condition. This reframing of systematic attempted murder as educational pranks was both insulting and terrifying. Ashley was essentially claiming that she had been trying to help me by creating life-threatening situations and that my near-death experiences were valuable lessons rather than criminal acts. The psychological manipulation inherent in this narrative showed that she remained completely disconnected from the reality of what she had done and continued to view me as someone whose life she had the right to endanger for my own supposed benefit. Martinez showed me excerpts from Ashley's statement to her defense attorney, which had been shared as part of the plea negotiation process. Reading Ashley's own words describing her actions was a disturbing glimpse into her twisted mindset and her continued inability to comprehend the severity of her crimes. "I never wanted Jessica to die," Ashley had told her lawyer. "I was trying to show her what it would be like if her medication stopped working so she would be more grateful for having access to treatment. I thought if she experienced some difficulty breathing, she would understand how fortunate she is to have medication that usually works so well. I was always nearby when I replaced her medication, and I was prepared to help her if anything serious happened." The arrogance and delusion in Ashley's statement were breathtaking. She was claiming that creating life-threatening asthma attacks was a form of therapy designed to increase my gratitude for my medication. She was also suggesting that her presence during my attacks somehow made them safe, ignoring the medical reality that people with severe asthma can die within minutes of being unable to access effective treatment. Perhaps most disturbing was Ashley's claim that she had been prepared to help me during the attacks she was causing. This suggested that she viewed herself as both the creator of my medical emergencies and my potential rescuer, a godlike role that allowed her to control whether I lived or died while positioning herself as my savior when she chose to intervene. Dr. Green was consulted about the medical accuracy of Ashley's claims, and her assessment was unequivocal. "What Ashley is describing is not medical education or therapy," Dr. Green explained during a meeting with Martinez and me. "Creating life-threatening situations for someone with a serious medical condition is attempted murder, regardless of the stated motivation. The fact that she was present during some of these attacks doesn't make them safe, it makes her a witness to her own attempts to kill Jessica." Dr. Green's testimony would be crucial if the case went to trial, as she could explain to a jury exactly how dangerous Ashley's actions had been and why her claimed educational motives were medically nonsensical. Asthma attacks are not learning experiences that make people more grateful for their medication. They are potentially fatal medical emergencies that require immediate treatment with effective medicine. The plea proposal also included Ashley's offer to undergo psychological counseling and to complete community service related to health education, supposedly to address the underlying issues that had led to her poor judgment. Her lawyer characterized this as evidence of her commitment to rehabilitation and her understanding that her actions had been wrong, even if they had been motivated by concern for my well-being. However, the specific nature of Ashley's proposed rehabilitation revealed her continued misunderstanding of her crimes. Rather than acknowledging that she had attempted murder and needed treatment for homicidal tendencies, she was framing her actions as the result of misguided helpfulness that could be corrected through education about appropriate ways to express concern for family members. Martinez and I discussed the pros and cons of accepting a plea deal versus proceeding to trial. A plea agreement would guarantee that Ashley faced some consequences for her actions and would avoid the stress and uncertainty of a trial, but it would also allow her to escape the full accountability that her crimes deserved. More importantly, accepting a plea that characterized attempted murder as pranks gone wrong would validate Ashley's minimization of her actions and potentially put me at risk if she decided to resume her educational campaign in the future. After consulting with Dr. Green, Detective Torres, and Sarah Kim, I decided to reject the plea proposal and proceed to trial. The evidence against Ashley was overwhelming, and the systematic nature of her crimes demanded full accountability rather than the slap on the wrist that a reduced plea would represent. I also felt that accepting her characterization of attempted murder as misguided helpfulness would be a betrayal of my own experience and a dangerous precedent for future cases. When Martinez informed Ashley's lawyer that the plea proposal had been rejected, Ashley's response provided additional insight into her psychological state and her continued lack of genuine remorse. According to her attorney, Ashley was surprised and hurt that I wasn't willing to accept her explanation of her actions and her offer to make amends through counseling and community service. Ashley feels that Jessica is being vindictive and refusing to acknowledge that this was never about trying to hurt her, the defense attorney told Martinez during a follow-up conversation. She's disappointed that her sister won't give her credit for trying to help, even if her methods were flawed. Ashley believes that Jessica is allowing outside influences to turn a family matter into a criminal case that will destroy both of their futures. This response revealed that Ashley remained completely committed to her narrative that she had been trying to help me and that I was being unreasonable by refusing to accept her good intentions as sufficient justification for systematic attempted murder. She was also continuing to frame the prosecution as a betrayal of family loyalty rather than as appropriate accountability for serious crimes. The rejection of the plea deal marked a turning point in Ashley's public presentation of her case. Her initial strategy of maintaining complete innocence was replaced by a more sophisticated approach that acknowledged wrongdoing while minimizing its severity and reframing it as the product of good intentions gone awry. Ashley's supporters, primarily my parents and extended family members, embraced this new narrative enthusiastically. They had been uncomfortable defending Ashley's complete innocence in the face of overwhelming evidence, but they could much more easily support the idea that she had made mistakes while trying to help me. This reframing allowed them to maintain their belief in Ashley's fundamental goodness while acknowledging that something had indeed gone wrong. Mom became particularly vocal in promoting this narrative, giving interviews to local media outlets about the tragedy of a family being torn apart by a misunderstanding that had escalated beyond all reasonable proportions. She portrayed Ashley as a caring sister whose attempts to help had been misinterpreted by medical professionals and law enforcement officers who didn't understand the close relationship we had always shared. Ashley has always been protective of Jessica, Mom told a local television reporter during a segment about the case. She's studied medicine specifically because she wanted to help people with conditions like her sister's. The idea that she would intentionally try to hurt Jessica is absolutely ridiculous. This is a case of good intentions being criminalized by people who don't understand how much these girls love each other. The media attention brought additional pressure for me to accept Ashley's minimized version of events and to embrace the narrative that this was all a tragic misunderstanding. Several news outlets portrayed the case as a cautionary tale about the dangers of involving law enforcement in family disputes, suggesting that Ashley and I could have worked out our differences privately if outside agencies hadn't interfered. This media coverage was particularly frustrating because it ignored the documented evidence of Ashley's systematic campaign against me and instead focused on emotional appeals about family relationships and the tragedy of a promising young woman facing serious criminal charges. The reporters seemed more interested in the human drama of a divided family than in the medical and legal facts that proved Ashley had repeatedly tried to murder me. Dr. Green was interviewed by several media outlets and provided clear factual information about the medical evidence in the case, but her expert testimony was often overshadowed by more emotionally compelling interviews with my family members. The contrast between Dr. Green's clinical explanation of the evidence and my parents' tearful pleas for understanding created a narrative tension that many outlets exploited for dramatic effect. Detective Torres also participated in media interviews explaining the law enforcement perspective on the case and emphasizing that the evidence clearly supported charges of attempted murder rather than misguided pranks. However, his professional presentation was less telegenic than the emotional family drama, and many outlets gave more coverage to my parents' perspective than to the factual evidence he presented. The media attention created additional stress during an already difficult time, but it also served to document Ashley's continued minimization of her crimes and her family's ongoing support for narratives that prioritized her reputation over my safety. The public nature of their statements would later become relevant during the trial, as they demonstrated a pattern of refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of Ashley's actions. Sarah Kim helped me navigate the media attention and the renewed family pressure that accompanied Ashley's shifted strategy. She explained that this pattern of acknowledging wrongdoing while minimizing its severity was common among perpetrators of serious crimes, especially when they had strong family support for their preferred narrative. What Ashley is doing now is more sophisticated than complete denial, but it's still a form of manipulation, Sarah explained during one of our counseling sessions. She's acknowledging just enough wrongdoing to appear reasonable while maintaining that her core motivations were good. This allows her supporters to feel comfortable defending her while still ignoring the reality of what she actually did to you. The counseling sessions with Sarah became even more important as the case moved toward trial and the pressure to accept Ashley's minimized version of events intensified. Sarah helped me understand that my insistence on full accountability was not vindictive or unreasonable, despite what my family and their media supporters were claiming. As the trial date approached, Ashley's minimization strategy became more refined and coordinated. Her defense team arranged for character witnesses who would testify about her academic achievements, her stated desire to help people through medicine, and her previously loving relationship with me. This testimony was designed to support the narrative that her actions had been the result of misguided concern rather than homicidal intent. The defense also arranged for psychological evaluation that would allegedly demonstrate Ashley's lack of malicious intent and her potential for rehabilitation through counseling and education. This evaluation was conducted by a professional selected by the defense team and was designed to support their argument that Ashley posed no real danger to me or to society. However, the prosecution had arranged for its own psychological evaluation of Ashley, conducted by experts who specialized in cases involving systematic violence within families. This evaluation revealed a very different picture of Ashley's mental state and motivations, one that supported the attempted murder charges rather than the defense narrative of misguided helpfulness. The battle between these competing psychological evaluations would become a central element of the trial, with each side presenting expert testimony about Ashley's state of mind and the true nature of her actions. The defense would argue that Ashley's actions were the product of temporary poor judgment, while the prosecution would demonstrate that they were part of a calculated and ongoing campaign of attempted murder. As I prepared for the trial, I reflected on how Ashley's admission to some wrongdoing had actually strengthened my resolve to see the case through to completion. Her continued minimization of systematic attempted murder as educational pranks showed that she remained dangerous and unrepentant, making full accountability even more important for my future safety. The stage was set for a trial that would force a jury to decide whether Ashley's systematic replacement of my life-saving medication constituted attempted murder or merely pranks that had gone too far. The evidence was clear, but Ashley's sophisticated minimization strategy and strong family support would make the trial more complex than a simple presentation of facts. Part 7, Official Investigation begins. The formal launch of the comprehensive investigation into Ashley's crimes brought revelations that exceeded even the most serious expectations of the medical and legal professionals involved in my case. Detective Torres assembled a specialized task force that included forensic analysts, medical experts, and digital forensics specialists to examine every aspect of Ashley's systematic campaign against me. What they discovered painted a picture of premeditation and calculation that went far beyond anything revealed in her initial notebook. The digital forensics team's analysis of Ashley's electronic devices uncovered a treasure trove of evidence that demonstrated the sophisticated planning behind her attacks on my health. Her laptop contained extensive research into asthma medications, their chemical compositions, and potential substitute substances that could be used to replace them without immediate detection. Browser history revealed visits to medical databases, pharmaceutical websites, and even forums where people discussed medication tampering for various purposes. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of an encrypted folder on Ashley's computer titled Project Breathless, which contained detailed plans for her campaign against me spanning back over 2 years. The folder included research notes about my specific medical condition, schedules of my medication routines, and even contingency plans for different scenarios depending on how I responded to her sabotage efforts. One document within the folder, titled Subject Analysis and Baseline Establishment, read like a clinical research proposal focused on studying my reactions to medication failure. Ashley had documented my normal breathing patterns, my typical responses to genuine asthma attacks, and even my behavioral patterns around medication use. This baseline data had apparently been used to design interventions that would cause maximum distress while maintaining what she called plausible medical deniability. Detective Torres shared excerpts from these documents with me during a briefing that left me feeling physically sick and emotionally devastated. Reading Ashley's clinical analysis of my medical vulnerability was like discovering that I had been living with a predator who had been studying me like a laboratory specimen for years before beginning her active campaign to harm me. The level of premeditation we're seeing here is extraordinary. Detective Torres explained, his voice carrying a tone of professional disgust that I had never heard from him before. Your sister didn't just decide one day to tamper with your medication, she spent years planning this campaign, studying your condition, and developing strategies to harm you while avoiding detection. This isn't a prank that went too far, this is systematic, calculated, attempted murder. The forensic analysis of my tampered medications revealed even more sophisticated planning than initially suspected. Ashley hadn't simply replaced my medication with saline solution, she had used different substitute substances at different times, apparently to study how various ineffective treatments would affect my condition. Some of the substitutes were completely harmless, while others contained substances that could actually worsen asthma symptoms. Dr. Green consulted with toxicology experts to analyze the various substances Ashley had used as medication replacements. Their findings revealed that Ashley had progressed from harmless substitutes to increasingly dangerous ones, suggesting that her campaign had been escalating over time toward substances that could cause more severe and potentially fatal reactions. What we're seeing here is a pattern of experimentation, Dr. Green explained during a meeting with the investigation team. Ashley started with substances that would simply make Jessica's medication ineffective, but she gradually moved toward substances that would actively worsen her condition. If this pattern had continued, we could have seen the use of substances that would cause immediate and severe respiratory distress. The investigation also uncovered evidence that Ashley had been documenting my responses to her sabotage efforts through hidden cameras and recording devices. A thorough search of my family's home revealed tiny cameras hidden in my bedroom and bathroom, along with audio recording devices concealed in areas where I typically used my medication. This surveillance equipment had allowed Ashley to monitor my reactions to her attacks in real time and to adjust her strategies accordingly. The recordings recovered from these devices provided audio and video evidence of my distress during attacks caused by Ashley's tampering, along with her own voice providing commentary about my condition and her plans for future interventions. In one particularly chilling recording, Ashley could be heard describing my breathing difficulties as fascinating and speculating about how much worse she could make my condition without causing immediate death. This surveillance evidence transformed the case from systematic medication tampering to something approaching torture and sadistic experimentation. Ashley hadn't just been trying to harm me, she had been enjoying watching me suffer and had been studying my pain for her own twisted gratification. The voyeuristic element of her crimes added another layer of violation that made the betrayal even more devastating. Detective Torres brought in specialists from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit to review Ashley's documentation and surveillance evidence. Their assessment provided professional insight into Ashley's psychological profile and the likely progression of her criminal behavior if she hadn't been stopped. What we're dealing with here is someone who exhibits characteristics of a sadistic personality with medical training, the FBI profiler explained during a consultation. The combination of Ashley's medical knowledge, her access to her sister's medications, and her apparent enjoyment of causing and observing suffering makes her an extremely dangerous individual. If she hadn't been caught, we would likely have seen an escalation toward more direct and potentially fatal interventions. The profiler's assessment also addressed Ashley's apparent lack of empathy for my suffering and her ability to maintain normal relationships with other people while systematically torturing me. This compartmentalization of her behavior suggested a level of psychological sophistication that made her crimes even more disturbing. The investigation expanded to examine Ashley's activities at her university, where she had been studying pre-medicine with access to laboratory facilities and medical supplies. Campus security reviewed access logs for chemistry and biology laboratories, discovering that Ashley had been using these facilities outside of normal class hours and had checked out equipment and supplies that weren't required for her coursework. A review of Ashley's academic work revealed that she had been conducting unofficial research projects related to respiratory medications and their effects on people with breathing disorders. Her professors had been impressed by her initiative and depth of knowledge, unaware that her research was being applied to a systematic campaign against her own sister. The university's investigation also uncovered evidence that Ashley had been accessing medical databases and research journals through the school's library system, specifically searching for information about asthma medications, their chemical compositions, and potential interactions with other substances. This research had clearly informed her choice of substitute substances and her understanding of how to tamper with my medications effectively. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery that Ashley had been networking with other pre-medical students who had access to pharmaceutical supplies and laboratory equipment. Text messages and emails revealed that she had been obtaining materials from classmates under the pretense of conducting independent research projects when she was actually using these materials to harm me. The investigation team interviewed several of Ashley's university contacts who had unknowingly provided her with materials used in her campaign against me. These students were shocked to learn that their academic collaboration had been part of a systematic attempt to murder Ashley's sister, and several of them provided additional evidence about Ashley's requests for specific types of chemical compounds. The scope of Ashley's planning and preparation was becoming clear as the investigation progressed. She had been using her educational environment, her family relationships, and her access to my medications to conduct what amounted to a long-term torture and attempted murder campaign. The sophistication of her approach suggested that she viewed her crimes as a form of research project rather than as attacks on her sister. Detective Torres coordinated with prosecutors from the district attorney's office to ensure that all of the evidence being uncovered would be admissible in court and would support the most serious possible charges against Ashley. The systematic nature of her crimes and the evidence of escalation suggested that attempted murder charges were not only appropriate but potentially insufficient to capture the full scope of her criminal behavior. The investigation also examined the possibility that Ashley had committed similar crimes against other people, either before beginning her campaign against me or during the same time period. A review of medical records for people in Ashley's social circle revealed several individuals who had experienced unexplained medical episodes or complications while Ashley was present, raising the possibility that I wasn't her only victim. One particularly concerning case involved Ashley's college roommate who had experienced several severe allergic reactions during the time she was living with Ashley, despite having no previous history of serious allergies. The timing and nature of these reactions suggested possible tampering with food or medications, and the investigation team decided to pursue this lead as a potential pattern of behavior. The roommate, when interviewed by investigators, revealed that Ashley had often been present during her allergic reactions and had seemed unusually calm and helpful during these medical emergencies. She also mentioned that Ashley had frequently offered to help with meal preparation and had sometimes brought her drinks or snacks during times when she was feeling unwell. This pattern of being present during medical emergencies that she may have caused herself was consistent with Ashley's behavior during my asthma attacks. The investigation suggested that Ashley may have been practicing or refining her techniques on other victims before focusing her primary attention on me, or that she may have been conducting multiple simultaneous campaigns against different targets. The possibility that Ashley had other victims added urgency to the investigation and increased the importance of ensuring that she faced full accountability for her crimes. If she had been systematically harming multiple people while maintaining her facade as a caring medical student, the public safety implications were enormous. As the investigation continued, additional evidence emerged about Ashley's psychological state and her motivations for targeting me specifically. Analysis of her personal journals and correspondence revealed deep-seated resentment about the attention my medical condition had brought me throughout our childhood, along with fantasies about reversing our roles so that she would be seen as the capable, healthy sister, while I would be viewed as weak and dependent. One journal entry, dated several months before Ashley began actively tampering with my medications, revealed her thought process as she planned her campaign. Everyone always worries about Jessica and her breathing problems. But no one ever considers how hard it is to be the healthy sister who never gets attention. If Jessica's condition was actually as serious as everyone thinks, maybe people would finally notice how strong and capable I am in comparison. I could be the one taking care of her instead of the one being ignored. This entry and others like it revealed that Ashley's crimes weren't just about harming me, they were about positioning herself as my rescuer and caregiver while secretly being the cause of my suffering. She had been seeking to create a dynamic where she would be seen as heroic for helping me through medical crises that she was secretly causing. The investigation team's analysis of all the evidence collected painted a comprehensive picture of Ashley's crimes that was far more serious and systematic than anyone had initially suspected. The case had evolved from simple medication tampering to a complex pattern of torture, surveillance, and attempted murder that demonstrated sophisticated planning and escalating danger. Detective Torres prepared a final report summarizing all of the evidence for presentation to the district attorney's office and for use during Ashley's trial. The report documented not only the specific crimes Ashley had committed against me, but also the systematic nature of her planning, the sophistication of her methods, and the likelihood that she would have continued to escalate her attacks if she hadn't been stopped. The comprehensive investigation had transformed Ashley's case from a family dispute involving medication tampering into one of the most serious and well-documented cases of systematic attempted murder that the local law enforcement community had ever encountered. The evidence would provide prosecutors with an overwhelming case for conviction, but it had also revealed the true depth of Ashley's betrayal and the extent of the danger I had been living with for years without realizing it. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.